Hi, friends, and welcome to the Legend Fiction Show. I'm your host, Dominic, founder of Legend Fiction, joined today by G.M. Baker, also known as Mark, with a ton of novels, community member, phenomenal author, and just excited to have you with us. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, as we were chatting a little earlier, you came over to the United States from the UK at
To
about
Canada
11.
from the UK.
Excuse me, I keep saying
Yeah.
Canada. Right, I keep thinking
Well, you know,
the
you Americans,
continental North America.
you keep trying to make us Canadians be American. I don't know what that's
Keep trying to
about.
just amalgamate everything. We just want to buy everything up, don't we? So, GM, what is what's your latest novel that you've been working on? You got this series of these phenomenal novels. What was the first one? Is it The Wistful and the Good?
Wistful and
Is
the
that the
Good.
first
Yeah,
one?
that's my historical novel series set in Anglo-Saxon England, just right after the Lindisfarne, the great Lindisfarne raid that was sort of like the 9/11 of the Anglo-Saxon age.
Oh, that's an
Because it was
interesting
like the
metaphor.
first major attack of Vikings. So that's where the Vikings sort of, not the very first thing they ever did, but the first like big bombshell event. So
Wow. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then why did you pick that as the context and for your first series?
I think in part because Lindisfarne Island, um, it's really interesting. It's one of these tidal places. So there's a causeway across the sands, which is covered at high tide. Um, so, you know, you drive across on this causeway, you have to pay close attention or you're going to be stuck there. And, you know, if you can walk it, there is a walking path, but you better get your timing right.
Okay.
And so there's a ruined monastery there. There's an old castle there and a little village. It's really in the ruined monastery, which is a much later date. It was one of the ones that was, you know, the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII is when it was dissolved. But there's one, you know, how you get these vaultings, feelings of there is that arc going across, still standing. The rest of the roof is down, but there's
Wow.
one red
Just the
arc
arc.
that is still standing since Henry VIII. So it's a wonderful, magical little place, and it's kind of up the road from where my mother's people came from in County Durham. And you know, County Durham, that's very much the sort of Saint Cuthbert, who was the abbot of Lindisfarne earlier, not when the Vikings came. And that whole area is still, you know, the St. Cuthbert's Cross. There are shopping centers called Cuthbert's Way. You know,
Really?
and so the series is called Cuthbert's People, and it's really about, you know, that whole area of the Northwest that includes Durham with the famous cathedral and castle and all of that. And I think it was after 9/11, and it was sort of like people who had nothing to do with it were suddenly being persecuted. And I'm a great believer in, if you want to talk about something, don't talk about it directly. Find an analog in history, because then you can talk about it without all the contemporary passions cropping up,
Interesting.
right? So it was okay. Imagine a Norse trader landing on a village in Northumbria a week after the great Lindisfarne raid, where everybody's terrified of Vikings and hates them. That was the conceit originally. It turned around because it turned out my trader character wasn't very interesting, and I put in a girl, the Thane's daughter, to be a complication, and she just took over, and it's her story now.
Wow. Are you a historian, or are you just somebody fascinated by history? Like, how did this come across
Well,
your radar, your interest?
trained as an historian. I have an MA, and I dropped out of a PhD program in history at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, because we had this meeting with the chairman of the graduate studies department, and I asked him, you know, when you write your books, who's your audience? And he said, myself. And I thought, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun to write for other people, please. And kind of, I was gone from the program about a week later, because he was just talking about the joys of spending his days in the archives. And it's like, maybe not. So, but yeah, I mean, historical fiction kind of comes naturally in that sense.
So, who is your audience? Who do you like to write for?
I don't know. I think my audience probably died 20 years ago. I'm suffering from a mild case of old age. So, I grew up on Kipling and Rosemary Sutcliffe and E. Nesbit and,
Yeah, that was my childhood.
Tolkien and Lewis were these new guys.
Hmm.
So I kind of come from literature as it was in like the 60s and 70s. That's still like where my tastes were formed. And I think that's the audience I'm writing for. And I'm not quite sure where they are now. There's a lot of them out there still.
Right, right.
And I think there's a sort of new discovery of that because that was almost the last period before things really went postmodern and people stopped telling stories and it all became trauma literature and stuff. So, I looked back to writers like Alan Garner, who curiously not well known in North America. It's think if you like Tolkien, you would love Garner, but he doesn't come across much, which is a great shame to me. Uh,
He's a British author, right?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, he wrote The Weird Stone of Brissingham and Moon of Gomrath, The Owl Service, which is like the prototypical YA fantasy novel. It's just marvelous stuff. And it's well known in Britain. It just doesn't seem to come across the Atlantic the way Lewis and
I know.
Tolkien does.
Yeah, it's sad. I grew up in Australia, and so we would spend either a lot of time at the library or picking through the dollar bin at Good Sammy or St. Vincent de Paul, um, what do you call them, like charitable donation centers. And so I would build up a library, and I was the weird kid on the block with like 300 books in the garage, all neatly stacked and categorized. I was so proud of that library and read everything hundreds of times. And then to come here into the United States, North America, half of these authors nobody's ever heard of, or they're totally out of print now, which is I'm sad to have lost all those books. Like, so many are out of print or completely inaccessible. What's your latest novel? What are you working on these days?
I am just in the final polishing stages of what I think is a YA portal fantasy. I never quite know because I don't really keep up on the genre categories, but I think that's what it is. And it's called The Withered King. And it's kind of a conceit that I've had in mind for a long time because you get all these fantasies where, you know, modern children go through a portal into a land where they turn out to be the savior. And I've always thought, well, what if they say, no, I'm not doing that? That doesn't seem like a good idea at all. I just want to go home. That's basically, I've been trying to find a way to tell that story for a very long time. And I finally think I found it. Because obviously it doesn't really work as a story and they literally do just turn out and go home. You've got to
Mhm.
actually get them into the situation, even though they're going, no, no, you do you. And I kind of think of it as an Ordo and Morris story. Because Ordo and Morris, of course, come up lately because of your vice president. Ordo and Morris is the idea that there is an order to who you are responsible for, who you are supposed to love.
Mhm.
J.D. Vance invoked the phrase sort of as an in America first kind of way. In the
Okay.
West Wing, there's a scene in the West Wing where Jed Bartlett says, I don't know why it is that I am more concerned about American lives than I am about the lives of people in other countries, but I am. And I remember shouting at the screen, because that's your job.
Right. Was he being sarcastic or something, or it was actually genuine?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that was maybe, the producers kind of wrestling with their universalism and not being quite able to figure out how that would work. But I mean, Odo Morris is the thing that says, if two children fall in the lake and one of them is your child and one of them is a stranger, you save your child first. It's not wrong because you have a greater responsibility for your own child. They were given to you to care for. And
Right.
so there is this order of things. Dickens has a character, I think in David Copperfield, who ignores all the starving people around her, campaigning for starving children in Africa. And he makes a great irony out of this. And again, it's ordo amoris. Yes, the people of Africa are deserving of our charity, but if you've got people next door to you who are starving, they are, they are closer in the order of love because they're your neighbor. And so the idea here, the way I approach it is, Colin is 17, his sister Effie is 12. And his father died when he was 5. The last dying wish was look after your sister. So they stumble through a portal into a world, and people there say, your little sister is our promised savior, and we need her to go and fight our great enemy, the withered king, because only she is to them the spotless maiden, because they have spots on their shoulders, and of course she doesn't. And they go,
Interesting.
she's the spotless maiden. And he's going, wait a minute, none of us have spots. But, because it's this whole thing of like, everybody's perfectly certain what the prophecy means. No.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's saying, there's no way I am letting my little sister, who I promised to protect at all costs, go and fight your barbarian king. I'm very sorry. I know you're, but no. And then, of course, they don't all take no for an answer, and hilarity ensues after that.
Okay. So you've been wanting to write this story for a long time. What inspired it? Do you remember?
I don't know. I think it was a certain, all these sort of family adventures where, nowadays it tends to be one kid because we're such an individualistic, but all the old adventures were multiple, where whole families were plunged into these things. In Narnia, Peter kind of gets lost, right? It's all Edmund and Lucy, really, in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Where'd he go?
Right.
Why isn't he? So that was the kind of thing. It's like, I guess, being the big brother and having, 2 sisters and a little brother. And it's like, the big brothers in these stories aren't really behaving quite like big brothers.
Right.
And how do I, you understand why, right? It's almost like all the kids become equal in the story because but it always rankled with me. And so.
Right. Wow. When does so The Withered King, when does it come out?
I don't know
Or
yet,
is it still in
because
the draft?
it's one of these things I think I'm going to try a few agents with it. I'm not particularly thinking that, an Ordo Amoris novel with a male lead is necessarily the thing that the industry's desperate for these days, but you never know. So I'll go that route, and if they don't bite, then I'll bring it out myself. So
amazing. Do you write full time, Mark, or what do you do with yourself?
well, yeah, I was a professional writer my whole life. Most of it I was writing instruction manuals. Because if you were born to write and you also have a mortgage, then becoming a technical writer is the best thing I can recommend to anybody. Trying to make a
Really?
living writing fiction, that's a bold proposition. So basically, when I did retire, it was like, okay, I just sit down at the same computer every morning and follow the same schedule. The only difference is I barely make any money at it anymore. The old tech writing game was pretty lucrative. Writing fiction, let's say it has a different set of rewards.
Right. So would you say you've now become what you fled, an author who writes for himself?
I think as an author, at least to me, you're kind of asking a question. It's like, I've looked at this really hard and I've really tried to figure something out about what I'm seeing in the world. Then when I write the book, that's me going, do you see it too? Am I explaining this right? Am I getting it across? And if I'm getting it across, do you see it the same way I see it? So it's transitive. I'm writing about the thing that fascinates me, but to communicate it, not necessarily because I think the world needs to know this, because I'm so brilliant. It's much more, I need to find out if anybody else sees life this way too. So I need readers to do that, to say, oh yeah, that struck a note.
Mhm.
That's, I think, really the motivation. So it's not about just writing for me, and it's not
Mhm.
about writing to the market either. It's about crossing the bridge and meeting in the middle.
I like that. I do think that that's, you know what, you actually, gosh, years ago, I think it was, might have been a throwaway comment for you, but it actually impacted me a lot, where you talked about writing as not about moralizing, but sharing experiences. And I think you said that.
Yeah,
Anyhow.
I say lots of things along that line.
And I remember seeing that thinking that's exactly what I've been looking, that's exactly what this is. And so I ended up rewriting a lot of my early notes and thoughts on what fiction was about. But that line, that concept has stuck with me. And sometimes you'll be visited by this massive complex idea, and you're not even actually able to think it through proactively before writing it. Sometimes you have to sit and spend 100,000 words of active meditation to figure out, what is this thing? And then maybe at the end you start to get it. Sounds like you've spent a lot of time, you've got a lot more, well, experience than I do, plumbing and sort of probing at that aspect of being an author.
Yeah, there's a really interesting book by Lisa Cron called Wired for Story. And she looks at the neurology of the thing. And she says that the same areas of your brain fire when you're reading a story as when you're having an actual experience in the flesh. So, and I really think this is what, I think there's a biological function to stories, that they are something the brain needs in order to become wise and brave. Because I think if you want to act rightly, if you want to, behave properly in the world, you need three things. You need moral principles, which, you and I would get from the Gospels, but people can get from other places. But you need moral principles. You need to be able to understand what's happening in front of your nose. Like, you need to be wise enough to know what's really going on. And then you need to be brave enough to do something about it. And the wise and brave part doesn't come from the moral principles, right? You can have all the moral principles in the world, but if you don't understand what's going on and you're too afraid to act, you're still not going to act properly. So you don't get that from philosophizing, you get that from experience. And if you look at the kinds of books that we are drawn to, very much if you think about past generations and the lives they lived, you realize, well, these stories are kind of really experience for the life you expect to live. So men tend to like military stories. Well, why? Well, because we expect, not today, but for the past 100,000 years of our evolution, that we're going to have to stand in the battle line and be counted. Women read romances because one of the most important things for them, for their life to work out well, is to find a good man, because if they don't, then they're going to have a very miserable life. And so you can sort of see these very basic needs that you could argue we're so far removed from them now, but these are the stories we like.
Yeah, they're the ones that endure.
So there's a very basic need there for experience, which is why I don't like preachy novels. I don't like philosophical novels, because I think experience is prior to all that. How can you philosophize if you have no experience? If you have no wisdom born of experience, you're going to be just ideas floating. And you can see that in a lot of modern undergraduates, right, who've never had to earn a living, or, never milked a cow, or all of that stuff. And they can come up with just crazy ideas. And they don't have that grounding of experience and breadth of experience to say, that doesn't sound right. So I think that's what stories are for. And I think that's a biological point. But it's also the fact that our biological appetites are attuned to a different age. If we just follow our appetite, we're going to eat a lot of fat and sugar because that's what we're primed for. And I think it's about the same with stories. Like, we're not necessarily primed for the healthiest stories. You kind of have to develop and discipline your diet of stories just as you have to develop and discipline your diet for food so that you're getting ones that actually nourish you for living today and being wise about things today and brave about things today. But yeah, I mean, I think stories are just a very, very basic need, which means, our responsibility as storytellers is is a very basic need we're supplying. We're like farmers. So a farmer can't really say, I'm just farming for myself. No, you're farming to feed the world. And a storyteller, I don't think you can say, I just write stories for myself. No, you're writing stories to make people wise and brave. And if you don't do it right, you're doing harm. So that's kind of where I stand on that. But writing to market isn't being responsible either, right? It's like the farmer who only grows sugarcane, I suppose.
Right.
Straining the analogy, but
I want to ask you about your writing habits. And you sort of already mentioned first thing in the morning, sitting at the laptop and stuff, but I would love to ask specifically if you have advice for our community members about what you just said about creating stories to help us be wise and brave. And then maybe what encouragement you would have for a lot of us younger authors in the community who are messing around, trying to find our feet on the ice, trying to figure out what it is we want to say and how do we orient ourselves towards a goal like that. But first, what's your writing process, writing habit look like?
I wait for the idea, since I very much don't like the notion of the crap first draft. Just make words and then edit it. Tell that to any other profession. Like, oh, cook, just throw some ingredients in a pan and then we'll fix it later. Builder, just put up some sticks and we'll fix it. Don't do that. And it's not like, oh, plot everything out first, but it's know where this is going. Have a solid idea in mind before you start drafting and then draft slowly. Be careful. This is craftsmanship. There's no other craft in which people just throw stuff. I hate that advice.
And then if you would share with us where can people find you online? And then I've got that closing question.
Oh,
where can folk find you online?
gmbaker.net.
Excellent. And then words of encouragement on how up and coming authors and people in high school or college students who are playing around with creativity and with writing stories and so on, how do you encourage them to angle themselves towards this sense of being wise and brave and creating stories to encourage that?
Well, I think you have to start by being honest about in yourself about, am I wise and brave? And, the answer in my case is, well, not very, but am I at least in a position where I can appreciate wisdom and bravery when I see it? You can't, yes, read widely, but you were doing that already, right? Don't pastiche.
Fine. What is
A
what do you mean
pastiche is
by
when you're
pastiche?
imitating somebody else. So trying to be, I'm going to write another Narnia book, the whole fan fiction thing. And it's like, yeah, you can learn some technique doing that, but the heart of the thing comes from what is seen and felt in the world. Like it's that getting that, I've seen this, I've studied this real thing in the real world, and I need to know if you see it too. You can't do that by imitating somebody else. And learn technique from other people, but you can't do that essential communication thing. So, in many ways, the advice would be go outside and talk to people, do things, pay attention to people who are doing other kinds of things, find their wisdom, find their bravery. There is wisdom and bravery in all kinds of places in the world. And I almost think, if you're in college, that's probably the last place you're going to find a lot of wisdom and bravery. There's some everywhere. But I mean, the academic tenure, that kind of system, these are privileged positions. So they don't make as much of a call on wisdom, bravery. So, it's not, most of our great authors were not academics. They were sailors. They were journalists.
Yeah.
They,
Jack
they,
London, for
they
example.
served in the trenches in World War One. You want to learn wisdom and bravery? Get yourself to a trench, you know? So yes, there's all kinds of useful reasons to go to college, but it's not necessarily the place where you're going to get that exposure to the wisdom and bravery of people that you can then turn around and understand and communicate to other people. Sometimes you just need to go outside and talk to people and, discover how they live their lives.